Hello. Pardon for the background. This is the only place I can find solace. Thank you for joining me. I am Florencio, Reign of Gold. Victor Villaseñor. This is the story of his family. We start. Chapter 1. And so she, a child of the meteorite, found her true love among the shooting and the killing and the raping and the fire. Dreaming, Lupe reached across the bed, dreaming as she lay there, face down on the lumpy hard straw mattress. She reached under the warm-smelling cotton covers, searching for her mother, but she didn't find her. Opening her eyes, Lupe yawned and stretched, her long, thick hair falling from her neck and her shoulders in dark, rich curls. Her mother was sitting in the end of the bed, surrounded by long spears of silvery moonlight coming through the cracks of the lean-to. A cock crowed in the distance. A coyote howled, and the dogs in the village began to bark. Smiling, Lupe rubbed her sleep-swollen eyes and crawled across to her mother. Coming up behind her, Lupe put her arms around her mother and snuggled in closely to her soft, plump body. Her mother, Doña Guadalupe, stopped braiding her long gray hair and turned about, taking her youngest child into her arms. Lupe was 6 years old, and she'd been sleeping with her mother ever since her father, Don Victor, had left them to look for work in the lowlands. Feeling her mother's arm around her, Lupe closed her eyes and drifted back into the dream, feeling the cool morning breeze coming through the open doorway and hearing her mother's heartbeat against her left ear as she held there dreaming, feeling, drifting along the miracle of the new day to come in her gently, softly, slowly. The mother held her in her arms, humming, Coco, Cocoroco, Coco Paloma. And Lupe breathed deeply, feeling her mother's great, wonderfully warm breasts against her face and neck and chest. Then Lupe's 3 older sisters began to stir too. Carlota, Lupe's 7-year-old sister, was the first to come into bed with Lupe and her mother. Move over, said Carlota, snuggling between Lupe and her mother. You get to sleep with Mama all night long. Quiet, said Doña Guadalupe calmly. There's enough for me for all of you. She hugged her 2 youngest daughters close to her heart, and then came Maria, who was 13, and Sofia, who was 15, and they too got into the little straw bed. Outside, the cock crowed again. The coyote continued howling in the distance. Lupe's brother Victoriano came inside the lean-to with his dog. He was 10 and the only one allowed to sleep outside under the stars, because he was a boy. Buenos dias, he said, coming into the bed. Victoriano had been trying to be very hard to act like a man of the house ever since Don Victor had left them. Buenos dias, said the mother and the sisters. All right, said Doña Guadalupe, now we must get to work. And saying this, she pushed away her children like a mother dog disentangling herself from her little pups, and she stood up. She finished brushing out her long gray hair and wrapped it into a tight bundle at the nape of her neck. With her teeth, she opened the wooden fork that her son had made to her from an oak branch and used it to fasten her hair. Watching her mother in the starry night, Lupe felt so warm and good that she could still feel the touch of her mother and all over her as she slipped the huaraches, and went out to the lean-to to do her chores. Walking around the huge dark boulder to which their lean-to was anchored, Lupe looked up at the stars and the moon and pulled up her dress and squatted down in her heels and sleep hillside, facing downhill with her feet apart. She relieved herself in the privacy of the coarse white cotton dress, which was made from the sack that the flour came in. Wiping herself with a corn husk that she'd softened by chewing the night before, Lupe stood and looked at the huge boulder to the main part of the village below them, which was just beginning to stir. The American advancement at the gold mine across the box canyon was still asleep. Having cleansed herself, Lupe now knelt, as she had done every morning, feeling the greatness of the stars and the moon, and she gave her personal thanks to God, completing the second miracle of the day. Relieving yourself was the second miracle of the day. She continued around the day. She continued around to the steep side of the boulder, gripping and the huge rock to get to the gates of the goat's pen. Seeing Lupe in the pale moonlight, the two big milk goats and their young ones called in her tight, forceful voices. "Good morning," said Lupe, gathering up the handful of grass as she picked the evening before. "I hope all of you slept well and had good dreams of green meadows." The two big milk goats answered her, and she petted them, and they fed them. The two baby goats in the next pen called out for attention too. All four of these animals were fine goats, and they were the pride of Lupe's family. They made cheese from the milk of the two goats and served the cheese in the kitchen. "I hope you coyotes didn't bother you too much last night," she said to them. "After all, remember, last night was a full moon, and you know that every full moon the coyotes called the heavens for the wheels of cheese that the she-fox stole from them and hid at the bottom of the river." The two big milk goats loved Lupe and her gentle voice and ate contentedly. "Good morning to you too," she said, the babies in the next pen. "I'll be with you right after the milking." That's the love of God's animals, huh? Picking up her two clay pots, the little stool her father had made for her, Lupe walked around to the left side of the first goat, and she sat down on the stool. She petted the big goat. She petted the big goat on her rump in long, slow strokes. Then she swept back her own long, dark hair, tied it behind her head, and rested her forehead on the goat's hard belly. Taking one large rosy tit in each hand, she closed the top of her tit with her thumb and the index finger and rolled down the rest of her hand, forcing the milk out with a hard hissing sound into the empty pot. Humming as she milked, Lupe worked hard and steadily, feeling the goosebumps as she now performed the third miracle of the day. Work. Third miracle of the day is work. Spitting on her hands and rubbing her palms together, Lupe now picked up the rhythm of her milking, and she listened to the noises of the night beginning to fade and the sounds of her family beginning to take life. Her brother chopped wood in the front of the lean-to, and her sisters laughed and talked as they helped their mother in the kitchen in the ramada. The stars in the night were going to her whole world as she was coming to life. When Lupe was done with the first goat, she went to the second animal, and her two cats and dog came up and sprayed them in their faces with the milk, laughing happily. Finishing up both animals, Lupe poured out a little milk on the hollow spot of the top of the big boulder for the pets. Then she walked over to feed the two baby goats. The little goats called to her as they were her mother. Lupe lowered the pot to the ground and dipped their right hand into the sticky warm milk so that the little goats could nurse off her fingertips. They were still too young to drink the milk without having her fingers to suck on. Finishing, Lupe wiped the goat's milk from her right hand, and with her left, remembering her mother's words that any girl who ever rubbed fresh goat's milk onto her hands every morning would never have wrinkled hands as an old lady. Going inside the ramada, Lupe put the milk on her counter and hurried over to the stove to get one of those hot tortillas. Her three sisters were on the long pine wood counter, rolling out the tortillas that her mother had cooked for them. With great relish, Lupe took one of the hot tortillas off the stove, rolled it, and sat down on the well-swept, hand-packed dirt floor alongside the stove and her father had made for them. She ate happily. The freshly made corn tortillas smelled wonderful, but she could also smell the young goat's milk in her hands, and the smell of goat's milk was strong. It smelled of grass and brush and the earth itself. Yes, that's right, Carlotta said. "We found Lydia practicing her English. She plans to steal Scott, the American engineer, from Carmen. But Scott's already engaged to Carmen, said Maria. Carmen was Maria's best friend, and Maria knew how much her friend loved the tall, handsome engineer. Oh, I know, said Carlota, with her big eyes dancing with mischief as she rolled the tortilla. That's why Lydia's doing it. Lydia was Don Manuel's daughter. Don Manuel was the town's mayor, but he was also took care of the payroll for the Americans at the time, so he was the most powerful and wealthy American in their village. Oh, that's dirty, said Maria. I think I'll trash Lydia next time I get her alone. And Maria could do it. She was tall and strong, with wide, handsome Indian face and huge dark eyes and a big, full-lipped mouth, and she was one of the most powerful girls in the village. Calm down, said Sophia, who was older than Maria but shorter and more delicately made. She won't get him, Maria. What's wrong with you? Love is more powerful than English or fine dresses. Oh, I know that, said Maria, but still, it makes me so mad. Why does Lydia even bother to tempt him? Sophia giggled. Because he's the only American who doesn't follow Her Majesty all around the plaza like a little dog, and that just drives Lydia crazy, like a tick up a dog's tail. Lupe and her sister laughed so hard that Lupe and her sister laughed so hard that the Ramada echoed with sound. All night, their mother smiling.
Are you not going to come to the group?
I'm not in his group.
Oh, that's Florencio.
Fuck.
I apologize, Florencio.
All night, the mother smiling. No more. I don't want two miners arriving them, and having overheard her fine daughters talking to the cutthroat thieves in the night. Still laughing, Lupe glanced from her mother onto her sister. Oh, how she loved them, and how their little house and their animals and the smell of their life together. She could smell the chorizo, and her mother was cooking. She was Let's start again. I apologize for any interruption. Can't even hide in a fucking room here. Oh, pardon. Still laughing, Lupe glanced at her mother from her sisters. Oh, how she loved them and their little house and the animals, and the smell of their little life together. She could smell the chorizo that her mother was cooking. She could smell the smoke from the hard wood fire in the stove, and she could smell the strong, sweet herb like scent of a goat's milk on her hands. She felt rich with the good, full promise of life. Finishing her tortilla, Lupe got up and kissed her mother and hurried outside to finish her chores before the men arrived. Ever since her father had left them, she and her family had been making their lives by feeding the miners. She had helped Victoriano sweep the ground in the water and water it down. Their mother was a very proud woman. She kept one of the cleanest homes in all the village. Meeting her brother out front, Lupe quickly took to the broom, Meeting her brother out front, Lupe quickly took the broom and made a brush with small yellow flowers called the Mexican broom, and swept and hard packed as if their brother sprinkled it with water. They didn't have much time. The sun, was already making the eastern sky pale, and the Americans who lived up high on the barren slope across the canyon didn't tolerate anyone being late. Lupe and her brother were just finishing when two miners arrived. One was tall and thin, and his name was Flaco, and the other one was short and wide, and his name was Manos because of his huge, thick hands. Flaco and Manos were both in their late 20s. Flaco and Manos were both in their late 20s. They were both the oldest men in the Americans still employed at the mine. Buenos dias, Victoriano, and look at you, Lupe, said Flaco, touching her hair. Every day, I swear, you will grow more and more beautiful. Lupe blushed and saying nothing, and Victoriano stepped aside till the two miners could go inside. Buenos dias, said Manos as he passed by Lupe and her brother. Lupe nodded to Manos. She liked Manos better than Flaco. Manos never touched her or embarrassed her by saying how beautiful she was. Ever since Lupe could remember, Men, perfect strangers, had been stopping her and touching her hair and telling her how beautiful she was. It angered her. She was no dog to stop and pet. Buenos dias, said Lupe quietly to Manos. Then, just as Lupe was going to follow the two miners inside to help serve them breakfast, there came the sun. La cobija de los pobres, the blanket of the poor. The two miners stopped and took off their hats to give witness to the right eye of God himself, the sun, the greatest miracle of day. Lupe and Victoriano quit their labor and joined the two men, bowing their heads in greeting, and Doña Guadalupe and her other daughters came out from under the ramada and joined them. And here came the sun, reaching up, filling the box canyon with brilliance, and suddenly the whole canyon was alive, every rock and tree and blade of grass. And the birds and the people and the livestock came to life too. One moment the canyon had been silent, and the next it was noisy, and the birds chirping, and the dogs and the cats running around looking for something to eat, and the children shouting in the village below, and the goats and the cattle were playing in the ground, and the burros and the mules braying, filling the canyon with a symphony of sounds. Flaco and Manos put their hats back on and sat down at the table under the ramada, so they could look through the vines of the bougainvillea, and keep watch until the sun's progress. Lupe now went away to help her sister Carlota do the serving. Carlota and Lupe were the youngest, so Doña Guadalupe had them do the serving while she kept her older daughters in the kitchen. Maria and Sofia were way too ripe for the touching of men's quick hands. Way too ripe. Fucking men. Bringing Flaco and Manos their hot cinnamon coffee, Carlota joined the two sisters. Carlota joined the two men, but Lupe didn't. She was too shy. For as long as Lupe could remember, her sisters and brothers made fun of her because she kept to her mother's skirts, refusing to talk to anyone. Lupita, her sisters would say, someday you're going to have to talk to people and let go of mother's skirts, you know. No, I'm not, she said. I'm going to stay by Mama's side all my life. Well then, what are you going to do when you marry? They tease her. My husband will come to stay with me and Mama, or he can get out. For Lupe, her mother was everything. She was a perfect gift given to her by God. Lupe and Carlota were feeding the last of the miners when Old Man Benito arrived. Old Man Benito was the only miner who didn't work at the American-owned mine. He was a strange old man with brown blotches running up and down his face. He'd never married, and he'd searched for gold all his life. Once, long ago, he'd had a gold mine of his own until the Americans had taken it from Lupe. Until the Americans had taken it from him. Seeing Old Man Benito coming down the steep trail of the Ramada, Lupe quickly poured a full cup of coffee and took it down to him so he wouldn't have to come inside. He was 50 years old and the oldest man in the village, so many of the young miners had no respect for him. They would tease him and call him a fool. You're my angel, he said, putting the earthen cup to his lips, blowing on it and drinking a big air-sucking swallow. And I swear to it, mijita, that soon as I find gold, I'm going to give you and your family half, so we'll all be rich. Lupe's eyes filled with mischief. She loved the way he called her mijita, right, her little dear one. Don Benito had been like a part of the family for as long as he can remember. And this was the little game that they played each morning. Rich is the cream of the cow's fat milk, she said. Rich is the love of God that we deserve each new day, that we receive each new day. Rich isn't gold. Gold is only for people who are poor of heart. Don Benito laughed. Well, of course, you're absolutely right, mijita, he said. But also, believe me, being rich, why, rich is being able to sleep late if you wish, or not even able to work a day in your life. If you're tired. That's not rich, she said again, dancing happy. That's lazy, Don Benito. Well, lazy is richness for these old bones. He saying this, they both began to laugh. But the huge generators from the American encampment started up, and the box canyon was suddenly filled with low, rumbling sound. The lights came on inside the 6 stone buildings up the opposite side of the box canyon, and Lupe shivered, feeling cold all over. Well, Don Benito, excuse me, but I must hurry back inside and finish my work before they blow the horn. Pass your day with God, mijita. Thank you, and you do the same, Don Benito. Of course. Who else but God is crazy enough to follow me up to the cliffs where I work? Lupe was just going to go inside when the bellowing horn exploded. Lupe gripped her ears. Quickly, all the miners were up and out of the armada as fast as they could move. Passing by, one of the young miners saw Lupe holding her ears and the old man cringing. Hey, Benito, said his with his full mouth of food. Have you ever struck gold yet? He was a boy in his early teens. Almost. Just another shovel of rock, and I'll be rich again. Rich hell, said the young miner, winking to the other miners. You had it once, old man, and you lost it to drinking woman. Lady Luck is never going to give you a chance. Eh, Lupita? Lupita said nothing. All right, said Manos, coming behind the young miners. You heard the bull's horn. Let's move your tail. The young man laughed, and he and the other miners started up the rocky pathway. Manos shrugged, and Lupe and Don Benito. They were just young, he said. They're just young, he said. They don't know that in less than 3 years, Lady Luck will abandon them. Their lungs will be gone and their hands will be crushed. Don Benito nodded sadly. Yes, I know about Luck. She can be cruel. She can be cruel. Lupe glanced from Don Benito to Manos, wondering why it was that men always put misfortune into the dress of a fine woman. But before she could say anything, the horn blew again and Manos was off. Well, said Don Benito, once they were alone again, thank you for passing the sunrise with me. The pleasure was mine. Oh, no, the pleasure was mine, mijita, he insisted, reaching into his pocket. Here, I almost forgot. I brought you a little present, Lupita. And opening his twisted, torn right hand, Lupe saw the most beautiful feather she'd ever seen in all her life. It was green and bright blue with a touch of red and yellow near the tip. It was a feather from one of the huge flocks of parrots that came to roost into the towering, mighty cathedral, the cathedral-like cliffs where the old man worked, and where only eagles soared above the wild white pine trees. Oh, Don Benito, it's absolutely beautiful. Yes, and when I found it yesterday while I was working at the base of the cathedral jocks, I thought of you, the most beautiful creature, the most beautiful child in God has ever created. And saying this, he smiled. His face lit up completely, the whole face. And Lupe smiled too, not taking offense to his compliment. Pause.